Good evening, everyone, and especially to our three very esteemed navigators who have all got a wonderful history, primarily in the Sydney Hobart race, but in other events around the world. And we'll hear about those as the evening progresses. But I'm going to lead off with a question that's the same question going to be asked to all three, to Kingsley, Michael and Lindsay. I want to talk about the Hobart race and the start time. I want to ask you, when do you start to prepare and how do you prepare for the Great Race South, the Rolex Sydney Hobart race? So we'll ask our senior citizen first, Lindsay May, 47 consecutive Sydney Hobart races. Lindsay, over to you and good evening.
Yeah, hi Pete and hi everybody. Thank you for joining us. Well, obviously with crew work and everything else, you're really preparing all year, winter season starts and so forth. But from a navigator's point of view, you keep getting those questions. What's the weather going to be like? What's the weather going to be like? I can't really tell until about 7 days out what it's going to be, and really, 4 days out. The main thing is that I just work with checklists. Once you depart, you can't get anything. You're on your own. So that's for me is a checklist on the day that makes sure that I'm okay, and when I depart, I've got everything in line.
But just getting to the weather, I mean, when do you really start to lock into that? And I think you use some weathermen and different forums,
Yep.
BOM and
yeah,
things
I think I use Roger Badham. I think most of us use Roger, and Roger starts putting stuff out, 10 days before. As Roger says, I can't tell at the moment. And then finally he'll get to a stage and say, right, models are starting to align, and I can now start to lock things in a little bit. I'm watching the weather 4 months. You get a bit of a feel. Things have changed quite a lot over the seasons, and we've had a lot better weather in many years now. And the other thing is the current. I'm a great user of the East Australian current, the set, and I'm watching that for months really to see what's happening. And it's a very slow moving feature, but to me it's very important, especially if you're on a slower boat. So the set is my big thing. Weather, you work with what you've got.
Okay. Well, good evening to you, Kingsley, all the way from Western Australia. You've only done 37 consecutive Hobart races, so you've got a bit of catching up to do. Welcome. How would you prepare and how long out before the race?
Probably much the same as Lindsay, but about 3 weeks out, I'm starting to look at the East Coast current and also monitoring weather patterns, as whether there's a weekly cycle, whether there's a repeat or a period that the weather might repeat with the frontal systems or whatever. And then as you get closer, it's the 10 days, then 7 days, and then 3 to 4 days, you basically know what you're going to get. And then it's you get into the high resolution models and things towards the start day. And then keep running your models and see whether they're aligning, whether all the models are starting to agree.
Okay. Well, Michael, good evening to you. And how do you prepare?
Look, much the same, I suppose. I start preparing through the Blue Water if I'm participating in the Blue Water series. And I can get onto the NOAA website, the real-time environmental applications, which gives us some idea of the modelling as far out as, 14, even 21 days. The crew are always, I think everyone has said, is anxious to see and hear something, so I can sort of give them some information about that. We sometimes play a little game in the crew about best guess or what other people think. I encourage them to participate in the process of watching the weather. In relation to the current, not only do I observe the current, but I also have a few spies up and down the coast who might be out fishing, who might give me a bit of a clue about what the East Coast current is doing off Montague, things like that. That's very helpful information. And also on the Southport race, it's always good to get a mate who's out fishing at Coffs Harbour or something like that to give you an idea of the current. But also looking at the current grid as soon as you can get them. You can access the Tide Tech current grids, which is very good, and I put that onto the modelling that I'm using. And of course, the other thing I do is I start to try and get a feel, and I think everyone's talked about this, of how quickly those frontal systems are moving through, what's the timing of them, what's the duration of them, what's the intensity of them, and where the wind is coming from first and how quickly it's swinging to the east, to give a bit of a feel as to if the Hobart is the start in the beginning, middle, or the end of the frontal system, and how long the boat's likely to live in that system, and how likely it is before the weather will start to change to the next system, which then on the day gives the crew that opportunity of getting their best sail selection sorted. And we have pretty intense conversations about that for exiting the harbour, and particularly down the first part of the east coast of Australia. Of course, one of the interesting things I think is that the modelling particularly models the ocean well and the coastal weather particularly poorly. And I think everyone has to be kind of aware of that. Blue water's a classic for that. Friday night start, you've got all the modelling you want to do, you've picked your sail selection and whatever, and as soon as you stick your head out the heads, it's completely different to any of the modelling that's been suggested. So you've got to be a little bit realistic about this. Modelling is only a best guess. And I also, pick up on clouds and whatever. I was very lucky that when I studied my master's tickets many, many years ago, I had the benefit of Roger Clouds being my lecturer in weather. And he taught us he made us, in fact, create our own weather maps. And that's a skill that's been very valuable and I've kept ever since. So I guess they're the sorts of things I think about.
Right, and okay, well, we'll stick with you, Michael. Once the race is underway, what do you do, all the way down, say, to Tasman Island? How, do you stand a watch normally or not, or you just on the navigation? I guess it depends on the size of the boat to some extent. Well,
that's right. I mean, there's been a trend in the sort of bigger boats, and I do sail some of the bigger boats to try and have, a suggestion of 2 navigators. I get a bit nervous about that. I tend to think that I'm not going to sleep much for 2 or 3 days in any event. So, I just grab naps here and there. There's clear instructions to the crew to wake me if there's any change or significant wind event that I should know about, or if they're changing their course in any significant way that I should know about. But right from the moment we exit the heads, I'm thinking about short-term, medium-term and long-term strategies. And I think there's been ample written about dividing the Hobart up into sections, exiting the harbour, east coast of Australia, Bass Strait, Tasmania, and then the Derwent River. And I think you've got to think about the Hobart in that way. Last year was very interesting. We had that transition. We had to think about how to transition through that. We did that reasonably well on the 72. We were pretty happy with that. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the gribs that we get from Clouds, which are usually the best quality gribs because they're expensive to buy, and he has that ability to give us those, whereas the free ones aren't quite as high res. So you take those and they're good for about 12 hours or so. But what I think is really important and what I do prodigiously is I'm adjusting the grid file to the real-time weather. So if the breeze is, 135 and the grid file says it's 155, then you've got to adjust, you've got to swing that grid file, and then you've got to look at the pressure. And if the breeze is 15 knots in the grid file, it's 20 knots in real time, then you start fishing around in the grid file until you find a match. And then you can run the polars of the boat over that, and then you start to get a feel of how that breeze is going to transition. And if you've spent 4 weeks thinking about that anyway, then you can start to make some reasonably good, intelligent guesses about what's going to happen over the next 4 hours. We break everything into 4-hour lots.
Mm-hmm. Kingsley, how do you, once the race is underway, do you use Roger Badham prior to the race?
Yes, we have used Roger in the past, also one of his proteges in Jess, who worked with Roger with the New Zealand America's Cup deal and Volvo deal. But also I run a timesheet or a timeline sheet for the race to know when the updates are due, so that we get on top. If there's a change to the current grid, we'll look at, as soon as we can get the update, to see if that has changed to agree with it, so we know we're on the right track still and keep us on the right track. The updates, so they vary, some of 6 hours, some of 12 hours, some of 3 hours, and some of the high resolution ones are even closer. So you've got a number of models, maybe you're running 4 or 5 models to compare and trying to find out who is on the money, giving you the right information. and you tend to lean towards that, but not discard the others, because they may come into play with a change or a movement of a front. So it's keeping on top of what you've got, as Michael has said, keeping on top of what you've got, the degrees, and adjusting to make it right. If you've got internet all the way, if you don't, well, you've got to rely on your best judgment of what you've got on hand to work with. And sometimes it don't comes out well. Other times you hang on till you get to Tasmania and get another update to see if you're back on track again.
And Lindsay, once the race is underway, you're an expedition man, aren't you? You use expedition pretty strongly.
Yes, I use expedition. Of course, one of the things about getting all this information is a budgetary issue as well. It's one thing to sail on a boat that's got a huge budget and can get all that information. Another one where, you leave 40 miles off the coast and that's it, you pull the blinds down. For me, it's about the approach to Tassie. I agree with what everybody said and what Michael says about breaking it up, and I think we've all written about those sections. It's about the current. I just keep stressing the current, trying to work out where I am. Like, for example, if there's an eddy that I'm going to headbutt the current, I really do not want to be there. I want to be in where it's flowing in the direction we want to go. But by the same token, it's about trying to make sure, generally speaking, that you're well off as you approach Tassie. There are a couple of times where you might be in close in the case of a really strong sou'wester coming through. But, I realise that it sort of changes, but generally there's a pattern to the whole thing that, with a little bit of confidence, you can, in my opinion, you can keep working with what you've got for 24 hours or so and then get a new update if that's a budgetary constraint.
Well, the killer is always that last 40 miles from Tasman to the finish. And I mean, there's not much you can do about that, is there? You've got to arrive in Tasman in good shape and then, well, you've got to tough it out.
Yep. Well, you certainly, you're looking at your ETA, and of course today with GPS, we get some really good information on that. You obviously interpolate yourself and what the conditions, but we all just know that if you're going to be there from 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 11 o'clock the next morning, it's a world of hurt. And that's why I guess over the years, those boats in the 40 foot and a little bit bigger have done so well. They just seem to be able to make the course in that sort of time frame. And if you miss out on the window for the sea breeze, well, it's all over for another year.
Yes, well, thank you for that overview, guys. I now want to talk specifically, probably on an individual basis, on some of the races, and I'll stay with you, Lindsay. 47 consecutive Hobarts, 3 overall victories. And I want to talk about your first victory in 84 with the infamous Johnny Isles on India Pacific. I mean, that was a really tough race. And Peter Blake, later Sir Peter Blake, and sadly is no longer with us, he was on Lion, New Zealand that year, and he described it as liquid Himalayas in Bass Strait. Now, you took Indian Pacific way to sea in that race. Was that a function of that's the only way you could go with that boat, or what were the tactics there? I mean, it was a really hard race, and there was a lot of retirements.
Yeah, Peter, I'd hate to pick you up on a piece of pedantry, but wasn't it Peter Montgomery that described the liquid Himalayas?
Yeah, I didn't want to get too involved. Just get on with it.
Right.
Answer the question.
So what happened there in that race, we were coming into the Five Islands at Port Kembla, and we just had to tack out because of the land. And we went out, and as we started to go out, we just started to get lifted and lifted and lifted. And the lift was so good that we really couldn't tack off it. Now, this was a classic East Coast low, but we really didn't know that. And as Michael says, drawing his own weather maps, I did have the chart of all Australia with all the weather stations with little numbers, and you get that and you draw your own charts. And there was no doubt about what we had coming at us. And we were, in huge seas. But again, we weren't aware of the set. We didn't have the charts that we have now with the set. And our GPS, we did have transit in those days, and it wasn't working properly. And every now and then we got a position. There was nowhere in the world you were going to take Sexton sites. But when we did find out where we were, we discovered that we were a beam of, I think it was, Sovereign or something like that in on the shore. And at the time, the race authorities put us back a degree. They figured that I had it all wrong and wrong thing and so forth. We then sailed through the eye of the low, which was really quite an amazing thing to happen. All of a sudden, the sky opened up, birds spinning around, the breeze came in on the other side. And I had a little radio that I could key in the frequency, and I picked up Peter Montgomery doing a feed back to a helicopter and back to New Zealand, and they were saying that they had a spinnaker up. And so we just pulled away, and within 2 hours we had a kite up. But the conditions were horrendous. I don't think we really realised just how dangerous it was. We were sliding down the face of waves and everything else. The boat down below was absolute chaos. We had about 4 dozen eggs down there that we never ever found. They just went out in the pump somewhere or other. It was frightening. And when I look back and think of 98, I think that's what we had in 84, but we really didn't know better.
Yeah, okay. Well, Kingsley, I'll come to you. 37 consecutive Hobart races, which, as you say, from a Western Australian, that's surely a record, and it's a wonderful record. But a majority of those have been on the yacht named Chutzpah, owned by Bruce Taylor from Victoria. Now, I think you spent a bit of time in Melbourne sail making with hoods. How did you link up with Bruce on Chutzpah?
Bruce was, I sailed on Challenge 2 with Bruce, with Peter Rosethorn after Lou had sold it. The 84 race I did with Lou on Challenge 3, and we broke the boat, went home. But I met Bruce on Challenge, sailing on Challenge, and he was putting together a new Davidson 34. And I got involved in doing the deck layout for him and started sailing with him and making his sails. So apart from going to other boats in different times, a few times, even with Matt Allen 1 year, and the smallest boat, Krakatoa with Rod Skillett, most of the races have been with Bruce, and the team's been together for 25, 30 years. So it's good to go with a team of guys you know and can trust and put in the effort there.
Well, he's maintained basically the same crew all the way through. I mean, I think you've done 28 races with Bruce, and in second overall, you've won your division. And on Channel 7, the start, I get sick of saying the most popular winner would be Bruce Taylor and Chutzpah. Can you do it? Are you going this year with Bruce? Is the boat going?
Yes, he's put the entry in today, right. So we're going to go. And even Tom Stevenson says, I've got the design out for the mould, the half model, which is the same one behind me.
Yeah.
I'm ready to do one for CYC. You've got to do it this year. Come on.
Well, I really mean that. I think it would be the most popular win, but so we wish you well with that. Now, Michael, first Hobart way back in 1976, I think. Was that the first race you did to Hobart?
It was, yes.
On
Australian owner, Far Out. Yeah,
Far Out, okay. And how did that come about? How did you get involved in ocean racing?
I got involved in ocean racing when I sort of moved from a junior sailor in Avalon Sailing Club into the Royal Prince Alfred Yacht Club. And I sort of I went from skiffs and cherubs and things like that into etchels. And then got involved with some of the old blokes, I'll call them back then, I guess. I was a kid. And the first race I did, I'm pretty sure was a Bird Island race in a boat called Nirapa. I don't remember the design. It was a 36-foot yacht. I do recall you didn't want to spend too much time downstairs, as I recall. The timber bilges weren't particularly pleasant. And there was a couple of us, a couple of young kids really, who just ran around on the foredeck at the behest of the seniors down the back, who told us what to do. And that's how it kind of started. And progressed from that sort of sailing, Coffs Harbour races early on and so on. I can't remember exactly how I got a ride on Far Out. But I think that we had a couple of local Prince Alfred guys. It was a boat from Western Australia. The owner was from Western Australia, and that was how we sort of got onto that boat. That was our first foray into the Hobart race. And I guess before that, we'd done the equivalent of a sort of a Blue Water series a couple of years in a row out of Prince Alfred. And that's where it all started. Yeah.
Right. Well, I see a bit later down the track, another infamous character, Josko Grubig. You went to Hobart on Anaconda. Is that right?
Anaconda 2, actually.
She was the big catch.
The 52-footer, yeah.
Oh, the 52-footer. Okay.
Yeah.
Did Josko own it then?
No, he didn't own it. Or we chartered it, actually. It was a bunch of mates who got together and we chartered it. That was a Hobart that was designed more just for the cruise together. I was the skipper. I think we had a co-skipper there. There was a bunch of sailors from around Pittwater and Prince Alfred. And we took the boat down to Hobart, and then we did the cruise back, brought the families back on the trip back. And I guess that's one of those lovely experiences about Hobart. It doesn't have to be all about, the front end of the fleet and the pointy end of the fleet. And I was just thinking about, when I was listening to Kingsley, I think my entire ocean racing career has involved listening, talking to, or being alongside Schutzbach.
Right. Yeah. Well, Kingsley, I'll come to you again. Your first Hobart was with a freight train. Was that when Bob Williams owned it from Western Australia?
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was boat was put together over here, built over here, and with Graham Freeman, Frizzle, as the project manager, and he was obviously in the crew for that year. We won the Burns-Philp Maxi Series, but I think we were about 56th or 62nd in the Hobart, because it wasn't a Maxi year that year in '83. But no, it ended up enough points to win the Burns-Philp Maxi Series as it was in those days.
Yes. Well, your CV. You've certainly been involved in the marine game. You're a sailmaker, marine consultant, navigator, boat project manager and commissioner, sailing coach and delivery skipper. So you've done it all.
It's all salt in the veins.
Great. Well, Lindsay, back to you. As I said, 3 wins overall with Islesy on Indian Pacific, then Atara and Love and War in 2006. Just thumbnail on both those, or those victories with all those 3 victories, really. Just give us an overview of.
Well, we've done a little bit on the 84 one, but Islesy was an absolute character. And of course, Gunther Hoekma was also involved in that. There was a sort of a co-ownership charter thing there, and there was a little bit of tension between the two of them, which was a bit of fun. Then in 91 on Atara, John's story, that was really something. As of course, Atara was Madeline's daughter, and I'd done 88, 89 and 90 with Peter Kurtz, and I think yourself on a couple of those races. We only made it once out of those 3 particular years. That was the 89 that we got to Hobart. And then the boat was sold, and I was fortunate enough to be asked to go onto Atara with this particular group. And of course, it was Southern Cross Cup year, and Harold Cudmore joined us. And Harold was just an amazing, as a helmsman in a seaway, he's remarkable at how he can get a boat through the water and maintain speed. But we were talking before we came on there about, tacticians wanting to tack by half a degree and so forth. Harold would get you to call, a lay line from about half a mile out, and then you get to the mark and he'd go, "You cost me 2 boat licks," short of the mark and all this sort of stuff. But the 91 race just came together for us. We beat narrowly Lou on challenge. You'll have to help me as to which challenge that was, but and that was sort of great. And we did really well the following year, but didn't quite make it. And then of course 2006 on Love and War, it was just that wonderful opportunity to have the boat that Simon made available after Peter had passed away. And Pete, he was trying to win 3 Hobarts on Love and War. He wanted his 3rd Hobart win, and he was unable to make that with us in 2004. And 2006, it was the current. We just got into a current that we really didn't know it was there. We had a 4-knot current for 15 hours from out off Jarvis Bay all the way down. We got into 3 eddies. The wind changed. You couldn't have dreamed or dialed it in. Wind change just got on the right side, and all up, we got about 115 miles for free. And then we got to Tasman Island at night, and we had breeze, which wasn't there, and we got in the river and we had breeze, and we crossed the line at 9:15, and at 9:25 the river just shut down. It was glass. Unbelievable and incredibly lucky, really. We had a great crew, but by gosh, we were lucky.
Mm. Well, Michael, your 28 Hobart races, I guess, are many boats, and really some really classy boats. I guess the highlight for you, the overall victory in Loki in 2011.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm feeling a bit like a beginner though at 28 races, I've got to say.
Yes.
We'd come together with Loki in '99 on a 48 footer, then we'd upgraded to the 50-footer, and then to a 60-footer, which sadly we lost over in the Mediterranean, and then finally to a fully spec'd 63 Reichel Pugh IRC boat. And the first time we raced that, we ended up winning in 2011, but the first time we raced that was the fastest Hobart I've ever done. I think it was 09, which was 1 day, 23.5 hours. We were pretty impressed with that. And then we just kept chipping away, I guess, until eventually, we were successful in 2011. Mostly that was about how we managed Bass Strait. Two things happened there. We managed to get across yet another transition very efficiently and effectively, and some extremely hard-working crew. And then off Tasmania, we were fortunate enough that we down past Maria Island, down in past Wineglass, we were watching Hugo Boss that had come right into the shore. I was looking for a southeast change there, and they went in and got becalmed, and we tacked a little bit earlier into the southeast change and got round the corner, and were lucky enough to just have a shoot all the way down to the finish, and that's how that race ended up. So it was Hugo Boss that gave us a little bit of a window. He just got a little bit too close to the shore. He got becalmed. We didn't go in there. We found the southeast change just on the corner, a couple of tacks around the light, and in we went. So back in Bass Strait was where we really managed to get across a transition, and we got back to the west very efficiently. It was about sailing. Didn't have anything to do with tactics or navigation. It had to do with what Roger Badham used to say: clouds, keep your head out of the boat. We saw a big cloud coming. We sailed for the cloud. There was wind under the cloud. That gave us the puff to get across the transition. And then we just went back into our tactical mode and sailed on down past Tasmania. And I guess other people have talked about, those staying wide at the top, 30 miles, 20 and 10. That was pretty much how we ran the race from there. And then we tried to back up and do the impossible and win in 2012. And we were just unlucky that Wild Oats, the 100, just got in time to beat us, and we backed it up with a second. So I think really the two races combined were the penultimate for us in Loki. And we'd spent 3 boats and 12 years to get there, and pretty much the same crew.
Yeah.
And and interestingly, a lot of those crew are still together now on some of the other boats, Ichiban particularly. A lot of those crew have stayed together, which is a good thing, and that bond between those guys has been pretty solid. A bit like Schutzbar, I suspect. When you sail with people for such a long time, you get to know them really well. And I think one of the things as a navigator is learning to know the tacticians and the sailing master and how to present information to them. And some of them, are happy to look at a picture very quickly on a computer. Others want a bit of a detailed breakdown. Others just want to spend 5 minutes having a quick debrief in between watches. And I think one of the skills with that is to learn what is best, how to best relay that information to the people that matter so that they get that quickly and, get on with their job. If the weather's particularly bad, the crew don't want to spend half an hour chatting to you. They just want to get in and out of their wet weather gear, get upstairs or come down and get into their bumps. And that's something that we worked really hard on, particularly in the Loki program, the Andes program before that. And then since in Patrice, in the smaller boats, it's also been really important to do that as efficiently as possible.
Right. Well, Kingsley, second overall. You haven't got to that top of the podium yet, but how close were you to winning that you got second in Schutzbar?
It was about 36 minutes, I think, in the end. We were sitting in the shipwright's arms, watching, waiting, looking, trying hard to eat and drink. But then Roger Hickman blew on down the coast with the change and took the time off us, unfortunately. So, but many times we've been near it. Even the first year with the boat in 2007, we were apparently leading when we got to Tasman Island, but then, as you say, Storm Bay became a mill pond, and there was 50 footers there waiting when we got around the corner. So, so close many times, but the Derwent can take it away from you, as can Storm Bay.
Yes, indeed. when did you commence navigating? Were you always a navigator, or did you just grow into it, or by necessity? How did that come about for you?
Grew into it when probably in the stage of electronic navigation, because I've sort of self-taught computer, but got into the likes of MacC and Expedition, mainly now using Expedition, and with the advent of weather routing to give yourself the best options and look at all the options to back up your judgment and as Michael said, keep your eyes out of the boat still. You've still got to sail a boat, and that's sometimes I've not always navigating. I should be up there helping on deck as well. So the skills aren't just navigation, and we tend to share it with Bruce. I share it in at times when we put a joint together when he'll take over and maybe do a radio sked where I'm not where I'm on deck. So it does get shared a bit at times. Yeah. But the main computer side of it is my game, and spend a lot of time playing with it and getting the best out of it. And it's a great program, and it's more time you spend on it, the better off you are. You can't just go in lightly. You've got to learn it because it's a very involved program. But there's a lot, even some I don't use, but it's there if you want to use it.
Yeah. And Lindsay, your first Hobart in '73 with the another infamous character, Peter Rysdick in Anya of Gosford. Tell us, how did you get into navigation? How did that come about for you?
Well, just to back up a little bit, I did a cruise to New Zealand in 1972 with a bunch of old guys, ex-World War II guys, a load of fun. And Des Kelly, it was a boat called Diva Jana. And Des said, listen, you've done a great job. I'll get you a ride to Hobart. And true to his word, he got me with Peter Rysdick, and I got a ride with Peter. Rick Hammond, Steve Trevelyan, Alan Brown, Scruffy O'Neill. Oh. You know, it was great. And so then Peter built an East Coast, a Cole, East Coast 31 that you know pretty well.
Yeah.
And at that time, Gordon Marshall was running celestial navigation courses at the CYC. And I did that course with Gordon. And the boat was sold for 1975, and I didn't have a ride. I was, far at hand. And I rang up Gordon and said, Gordon, look, I haven't got a ride to Hobart. I'm prepared to go as a navigator doing celestials. So Gordon found me 2 boats, and he said, give you some fatherly advice. You'll take the first offer you get. And that was Dancing Mouse with Cliff McGarry. And I went off, and 75 race was a really nor'easter all the way to Hobart, to Tasman. And the speedos were under reading. And so the boats were way further south than what they thought they were, because the transducers were in froth. And I managed to get a sight at about 10 o'clock in the morning. I thought we were off Shooting Passage, and I got one sight, and I had a radio direction finder, and I crossed all those, and I figured we were just about off Tasman Island. I called Cliff, and a little bit like Michael says, talk to the skipper, and I said, look, DR has me here, but this site and the radio direction finder lines got me here. And he said, well, if you reckon we're here, we'll jibe. And we jibed. And we went round Tasman Island. We never saw Tasman Island until we were at Cape Rowell. And back in there it was. And so that was, that was my baptism of fire. And I then went on with Jeff Lee and so forth, Bobby Branack. I filled in for Bobby when he was unable to make races, and it just sort of snowballed from there. And of course, all of that was really was sextant sites, and you really had to be quite good and quick at it. And we did that right up until 1983 when the rules changed. Yeah.
So the question is, I know someone's just asked the question, how much has navigation changed? I mean, it's an extraordinarily long question, a short question, but a long answer. I mean, as you alluded to, in the early days, sextants, DR, cross your fingers. Today, push a button, you know exactly where you are.
Yeah. So this question is really very, very good, because one of the things as navigators is that we really don't get to sail with other navigators. We don't really share, I don't believe we really share this stuff very well. Now, I guess if you've worked on a program like an America's Cup or a Volvo or something like that, you are getting all that training. But when you're a weekend warrior per se, you don't get that opportunity. So a lot of the stuff that you do, I'm sure that we do lots of things ourselves which are really, really good that we've generated ourselves. So how has it changed? Well, it's a lot faster to know where you are, obviously with the accuracy we have, and that of course is huge plus for safety. of knowing if something happens, somebody goes overboard, you know where they are. But what we have now is that we've got so much information that you've got to become a clearinghouse. You know, you've really got to get rid of the drosses, weather, and you know, it's just overwhelming, really. And then, of course, everybody's got access to this as well. So you've got a whole bunch of people giving you input. You've really got to work very, very hard to be able to distill that down. That's one of the changes. Way more information today than we used to have.
Michael, how accurate is the weather information? How accurate do you find it these days?
That's a very good question. Look, it depends on the modelling that you're getting, and it depends on where you're expecting that modelling to operate. So, like I said before, if you're operating sort of 5 miles off the coast of New South Wales, the modelling is not going to manage that particularly well. I've done a couple of races recently. I didn't think I put it on my CV, actually. New Caledonia race, around New Caledonia, the Group Armour race. First time I was lucky enough to do that in Ichiban, and the second time we did it with Patrice, and we won that race. And it's quite interesting when you look at the modelling where there's an island in the middle as to how the weather grid can't cope with trying to paint the wind and the predicted wind over the island, because it just takes its best guess at a reasonably small feature, unlike Australia. And it's kind of, when you look at that, you kind of realise just how much of a best guess modelling actually is as compared to, and I think this is often an expectation of people new into the sport, is that they can buy the systems and the electronics, they can plug it all in, they can run a bit of modelling, get some nice polar files off the designer, and some the sail charts off the sailmaker, and run them all, and miraculously you'll just go out there and start winning races. Whereas in actual fact, it's all best guess stuff. And you really need to, and I think Lindsay really nails it on the head, and I saw Kingsley nodding as well. You are a clearinghouse. You have to try and get rid of the rubbish. You have to try and analyse what's best working for you at the time. And some models will work well at times, and other models won't work well, depending where you are. I recall in Sardinia, there was a prize for those who could best guess the wind direction and speed at the end of the day off the headland. We may have cheated a little bit, but we did win that prize. And I won't tell you how we did it. But again, it's about trying to figure, and also the boat itself. So, we travel very quickly now, and which simply means, for me, we can travel very quickly in the wrong direction, which means we can go, a long way from where we need to go very, very quickly. You're doing 25 knots downhill in the wrong direction, you end up somewhere very quickly where you don't want to be. And even uphill now, I was thinking about one of the first ocean races I did. I think it was an SNS 36 or something. It was the last South Solitary Island race. And our navigation consisted of this. We went round the island in a southerly. We sailed south as far as we could until we eventually thought we should tack. And when we tacked, we eventually came in at Cape 3 Points. And that was the sum total of the navigation for that race. And luckily, we didn't go past Pittwater. And I was also thinking about a delivery on Anaconda when I, DR'd the entire way back across Bass Strait, and we couldn't get any sights. I've still got my sextant. So the weather was overcast. There was no sights, nothing at all. And there's a certain sense of relief on the faces of the crew when Australia pops up when you says it will, when you predicted it might happen. So it's, how's navigation changed? It's changed enormously. I remember doing a life raft exercise off Sydney before the GPS systems. And one of the interesting things about that was that the fix that we got for when we jumped in the water and we activated our EPIRBs as they were in those days, the best fix they could get was halfway up the Parramatta River. So safety has changed enormously, and the advent of GPS has changed enormously. But it seems to impose this kind of almost unrealistic expectation on navigators to know a whole lot more than what they can really know. What they can know is what is a best guess, looking at the conditions, looking what is real time. I mean, I remember doing a Southport race, and I said to the navigator on the boat at the time, who was a great old bloke, I said, "What do you think the current is?" He said, "Oh, there's no current here." And I said, "Well, come up and have a bit of a look." And beside us, there was a fishing boat anchored with a bow wave. So there was plenty of current.
Yeah.
So, but, you know, there is this incredible expectation that we are the magic bullet. We know all of these things and whatever. And of course, when we get it all right, everyone's, you know, incredibly happy. But what it requires to get it right is an enormous amount of work and dedication and very little sleep usually.
Yeah. Kingsley, to you, celestial navigation still has a part to play, do you feel, or not?
Not as such. I was thinking when we were talking about before that must have been the early races. We did a celestial navigation course because there was a requirement to have 2 celestial navigators on each boat, carry the books and the sextant in the race. And that went by the border the next year, I think. So I haven't used it since. I'm probably very rusty, so I wouldn't be able to find where it was. But when in the training and qualification, got to within 50 metres, I was pretty happy with.
Yeah.
But no, not so much used these days. It's a weight you don't take. You don't take it with you. But a skill I always thought I'd go back and have a go at some time.
Yeah. Yeah. Lindsay, do you travel with a sextant?
Not anymore, Pete. However, I did the Transpac race last year on Kealoha too, and they did have a division whereby, not that you had to do it exclusively, but take sites, and there was some prize for it. So we took some sites. The sites were okay, but trying to reduce them, I didn't really have much time beforehand to get into it. And luckily, we had a young guy on board who is a navigator of big ships, and he's done all these courses, and he did most of this stuff. Was very, very good. But we never went and plotted it. You know, like it's about a 40, when you're really on your game, it's about a 40 to 50 minute exercise from the time you come below to work it all out, reduce it, and then plot it. So, no, I haven't done it. And I just know one of these days, the whole thing's going to go belly up. But I think when you go to Hobart, you've got a pretty fair idea, you know, where you are with the sea and the seaweed and other bits and pieces that we probably should just be able to get at least close to the coast to find out if we lost everything. But anyway, everyone's got on their phone and their watches and everything else. You'd have 20 blokes all telling you where you are anyhow.
Yeah. Well, we've got a lot of questions coming in, so we'll just try and get some quick answers. Probably for you, Michael. How does a Hobart race for a navigator differ from, say, a European race or a United States race, say a Fastnet or a Transpac?
How does a Hobart race differ for those?
Yes, differ for a navigator.
I'm not sure that it differs much at all. Mainly it means you have to think about how you're going to present the information, how you're going to gather the data, which are the best weather models to get when you're travelling. I know when we've done the Middle Sea race and we've sailed in Sardinia and things like that, you know, we've gathered in hotel rooms and sort of presented that information in various different ways to all the crew from time to time. Fastnet, we had, you know, very intensive work. I was working together with Adrian at that time, and Adrian announced to us just before the Fastnet race that she was pregnant, and suddenly I had the hat, and off we went, as the doctor had suggested to her that she shouldn't do that race, and she's a fantastic navigator. I've worked with her a lot. And then, of course, when you're traveling a lot, it depends on the boat, which boat you're going to be on, what technical systems they've got. You know, it's good to have really good connections in Australia that you can contact. I know that, you know, when I did the Group Armour race, for example, on Ichiban, the 60, we had an issue with someone plugging in a SIM card into the system, which kind of crashed that. And dear old Simon Weston spent till on the phone whilst I was down the back of a carbon fibre boat in the middle of summer trying to repair that system. I think I finished that at about 6 a.m, went back to the hotel, had a shower and came back and jumped on the boat, and then off we went for the race. So there's a lot of stuff that a navigator's got to be willing to do when maybe the crew aren't on the boat at all. And I think when you're traveling, you've got to manage that even more efficiently. So yeah, it's a lot about planning and looking forward to what that sort of information is and what's going to be available to you. And the French information is particularly good in Europe, I have to say.
Yeah. Kingsley, a little bit of a controversial one. Do you see a future for HF radios in the Hobart race, or would you like to see a shift to sat phone comms?
I personally think there's still a place for HF radio. When you, especially in this search scenarios, being able to talk to multiple people rather than having to ring everyone, you can talk and broadcast to a wider audience rapidly and get a better outcome perhaps than trying to deal with a satellite phone. Satellite phone, okay, it's a backup for our position reporting, but the HF radio I'm still a fan of it, I think.
Okay. Lindsay, for you, a question. How does one become a navigator or train to become a navigator?
Oh, well, I think in this day and age, with everybody with being computer literate as they are, younger people are able to take this stuff on board and run with it. So that's one thing. But there is just a heck of a lot, in my opinion, to your experience. And, when Michael answering that question about overseas races, they are really challenging because, once you go to the Northern Hemisphere, everything is upside down as far as the systems are concerned. One of the advantages these days is that you can a lot of information, beforehand, but you get on board boats and there are things that, crikey's, boats out of Hong Kong and out of Newport, Rhode Island, and stuff doesn't work. And again, Simon Weston, he's had calls from me at all hours of the night and day to sort out issues and so forth. But to become a navigator, somehow you just got to get that opening. It's really, really hard. It's hard these days, I think, to get an opening on a boat. Sailing is so popular. There are so many good sailors out in the skiff world and so forth. You're being asked that question all the time. Oh, I want to go to Hobart. I get people from overseas saying, oh, can you get me on a boat for Hobart? No, I can't. It's really, really hard. So somewhere you've got to get a break, and then you've got to be able to get on. And usually if you're a good sailor, you'll work as a tactician, you understand all that sort of stuff, and hopefully you'll be invited again.
Yeah. Well, Lindsay, stick with you. I want to talk about the 93 Hobart race, when you were involved in one of the most remarkable survival stories in the history of the Sydney Hobart race, when John Quinn was washed overboard, I think on the second night in very vigorous conditions entering Bass Strait. And I think, probably his crew had given him up for being drowned at sea. And anyway, he was found, and you were on the boat. You had retired on a Tara, and you picked him up. Give us a quick overview of your scene that night of what was happening with ships and all the maydays and distress signals going out.
Okay, well, I describe this as the most successful Hobart race I ever had, was the rescue of John Quinn. It was miraculous, really. So at about 11 o'clock at night, we were just poking our nose into Bass Strait. Huge wave went over the boat and took our rig out. This was on a Tara, but it was the newer Tara. Let's not go into all that, new hull, same deck. And after we cleared that up, took us about an hour or more to clear all that up. And on the roads, we rigged up a jury aerial. We found out that MEM had lost a man overboard, and they were about 22 miles out to the northeast of us. And, we had no alternative but to head on out into that particular area. And we had all sorts of problems with delamination and everything else. But anyway, nevertheless, we went out. I'd been watching the current very, very carefully. I was working on all that as to where we should aim for. And then this tanker, the Ampol Sorel, which had been called back, they'd stood by another boat earlier, was called back into the area. And these fellows with their searchlight at about 4 o'clock in the morning picked up John Quinn in the water on their searchlight. And they came up on the radio, and the radio said, we've got him, we've got him, we've got him. And I thought, wow, fantastic. We're out of here. We're about 110 miles from Eden. Let's go. And then a minute later, they said, he's passing down our port side. And of course, I thought about it. It's a tanker. There's no way in the world they were going to pick this man. And Pete Messenger had taken a bearing on the tanker, the loom of the tanker. And I rang up the tanker, called the tanker and said, how far away are you? And he sort of said, look, mate, I'll look after this search. But anyway, he did tell me the distance. I worked out the time. We gunned it for 12 minutes and we went flat chat, and then we just stopped the engine. And within 30 seconds, there was this dark blob out on our port side. And this, we went, hey. we came round, we picked him up. But the finish of this was he came. We were coming into leeward. We didn't have a rig, but you just bring him on the leeward side. It was a bit lower, and a wave hit us, and he came down the high side on the port side. And the guys leaned over, and Billy Sykes got a line around his arms and his neck, and we got him there. And then one of our blokes went in the water. Anyway, we got him on board down below. And Bill Sykes said to him later on, he was in really good shape. He'd been in 5 hours in the water. And Bill said, mate, while you were bouncing along the hull, did you notice all the DLAM? And John Quinn, quick as a flash, came back and said, mate, when the ambulance arrives, you don't check out the condition of the Deuco. All-time classic, but it was remarkable. And he recovered and, and then he went on to win. I think he won his division in Hobart. And when we won in 2006, he was one of the first guys on the dock. He lives in Tassie now. And he was one of the first guys on the dock. Remarkable
story, as you say. Michael, you'd be out of interest, that question I asked to Kingsley about the HF radio, that came from Simon Weston. So,
I noticed that on the chat, actually.
Yeah, right. Okay. What's your quick thoughts on that?
Oh, maybe I'm not quite as keen as Kingsley is about it. I think there's possibly a place for HF radio, but what we do have now is we have trackers that keep a very close eye on the yacht. An experience that I had in Group Armour race, again on Ichiban, was that we'd fallen into a hole. On the Group Armour race, what happens is that the tracker tracks the yacht, and twice a day you text back by sat phone to the race committee if you say that the tracker information on your computer is wrong. Now, of course, this requires you to be in constant communication with the satellite system and the internet. And curiously, what happened there was we'd fallen into a hole for a little while, and the tracker showed us going around in a circle, which was entirely correct. That's exactly what we were doing. They didn't know what was going on, and they ended up calling my daughter, who was my next of kin in Australia, to see if she'd heard from me as to what was going on the boat, which is kind of interesting. I think technology is moving forward, and I think the trackers are particularly efficient at doing that. On the other side, and maybe Lindsay might agree with me here, there's a certain sense of the fact that we all know exactly where each other is, which takes away from that kind of mystery of the ocean racing that I grew up with and whatever. I mean, Stephen, the owner of Loki, used to very generously send me the satellite bill at the end of each Hobart race. Not that I wanted me to pay it, of course, but just to keep an eye on the bill. And it's easy to use up a lot of data. There's no doubt about that. But it requires a full commitment to the technology, I suppose. HF radios are problematic occasionally. I know in the last year's Blue Water, we were trying to use the VHF system and whatever, and that I think was quite efficient. And I know that there are times, and I think it requires a certain commitment by navigators too, that if you see the system going wrong, to chip in and help out. And I know in the Blue Waters that, there are a couple of navigators that are happy to do that. I'm one. I know Will Oxley's happy to do that and chip in. And I guess in times of emergency, and we all remember the Flinders Island race, certainly that HF radio was a particularly important factor in getting that message across to everyone else very quickly. So, I'm all for technology, but some of the technology takes the beauty away from ocean racing in a sense. There was a certain element of skill involved in not knowing where your competitors are, and of course when you can find that out, you can have crew asking you, literally, you've just put your head down for 15 minutes and someone's tapping you on the shoulder and saying, where's that boat again and how fast are they going, can drive you nuts, I guess. Yeah. But I think it's the way forward, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, we're getting towards the end, unfortunately. We're running out of time. Kingsley, I'll come to you. Schutzpaar won the 2018 Gold Coast race, Sydney Gold Coast race. That's been rescheduled because of the virus situation. Are you doing it this year again in October with
We plan to if the state borders come down, so we can come over, and some of our crew in Tasmania and Western Australia. So, and you've got to get the boat up there, and not having to go into quarantine when you come back might be a great idea. But yes, the plan is to do it, and then leave the boat in Sydney to do some of the Blue Water Series prior to the Hobart. Other than that, if it doesn't happen, we'll go up on Cup weekend and then do some Blue Water sailing, Blue Water Series races before the Hobart as our warm-up. Usually it's the Gold Coast race as our warm-up, get out of colder winters and get to the warmer climates, then leave the boat in Sydney to go from there.
Yeah, great. Michael, just in a wrap-up, I noticed you circumnavigated Australia. What did you do that in? Not a motor.
It was on a powerboat.
Okay.
Frank Maddich owned that boat, the racing car driver.
Yeah, absolutely.
We put that up in Queensland, and took it across to the America's Cup and did some work over there with Bondi and whatever, and then we came back around the bottom. And that's kind of how I became a navigator, because I grew up sailing, went off and got my qualifications. Went to Tech back in those days to get my master's ticket and whatever, and did celestial navigation and all the rest, and became a ship's captain. And that's where I developed that skill. And when you're sitting on a powerboat for hours and hours and hours on end, one of the things you do is fiddle with all the electronics and get very good at it.
Right.
And but I just see the time ticking by. One of the things that Lindsay said really impressed me, and something that I think we might try to develop, is that navigators are notorious for not sharing information between each other. And I'm thinking about how we might be able to do that better in the future. One of the ways I see how a navigator does it is by hopping on another boat and seeing what they've done, which is interesting, and how they set the boats up. But otherwise, we really don't share as much as we should, I think.
Okay, Michael, finally for you, this year, what's your program as far as ocean racing and the Hobart's concerned? Are you committed yet?
Last year I sailed on URM, the 72, the Michael Piesse 72. They've asked me to hold a spot for them this year. I haven't heard anything from them actually, so perhaps I ought not make too many commitments just at the moment. So that was a possibility. We were hoping that there might be another Patrice coming along. I think that's sort of in the wind at the moment. So at this stage, I've just kept a berth for URM, but I haven't confirmed anything at the moment. And everything's been delayed.
Yeah, sure.
And I haven't confirmed anything for Southport or anything just yet.
Right. Well, Lindsay, you're coming up for 48 Hobart races. You've had a wonderful career. I mean, you're a long-time navigator with George Snow on Brindabella. You gained line honours with George in 97. How would you rate a line honours win via handicap win?
Well, the line honours has that public thing. The line honours has coming up the Derwent with hundreds, and we think we finished on a Saturday, hundreds and hundreds of boats. It is really something, and the reception is wonderful, and that's great. But those of us that sail, the overall is what we really want to win, because we're competing against everybody as equals per se. So they're hard to get, but there's a heck of a lot of planning, good crews, good sailors, good boats. But gee whiz, you do need a bit of luck in this particular race, any race, but the Hobart especially.
You're booked in for the 48th race?
Hopefully on Kilo 2, where you just got to be well on Boxing Day. That's the big challenge.
Got to be upright. That's the main thing.
Well, we certainly do that. It's a very sober Christmas.
Yes, yeah. All right. Well, look, thank you, everyone. It's been fantastic. Kingsley, to you over in the West, stay well. We wish you well. And I hope I can stop saying we hope Chutzpah wins the Hobart race. So the very best to you and Bruce and the crew.
Thanks,
to Michael, see you around the club when it all happens again. And good luck on your race to Hobart, which I'm sure you'll be doing. And to Lindsay, to you, great. All had great careers, so especially you, Lindsay. Congratulations. And we hope everyone stays well out there in these strange times. And racing commences at the CYC in a couple of weeks' time. And the notice of race for the Rolex Sydney Hobart race has gone out today. The Noakes Gold Coast race is happening. So we're starting to get back on the water again, which is great for all of us. So we'll see you all around the club. Thanks again, Michael, Kingsley and Lindsay, and good night to you all.
Thanks
Thanks, Ben.
everybody. See you later. Thanks everybody for attending.
Thanks.
Sure.